And welcome to this week's episode of the Big Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented. I haven't had the opportunity to catch up with your comments as yet, but obviously I will do as soon as possible. Apologies obviously for no show on Sunday. I had to work Saturday, so that's why I'm doing a midweek episode of the show, or sort of late midweek episode of the show. So yes, right, today's episode of the show. As you well know, I'm a big fan of English whiskey, and there seems to be a growing number of English whiskey distilleries cropping up, which is really cool. I mean, you know, why should the Scots have all the fun at the end of the day? I mean, yeah, England had a history of distilling. Certainly, there was distilleries in some of the major ports like Liverpool, Bristol, which is ties in with today's episode of the show, and why not? You know, it's at the end of the day, what do you need to make great whiskey? Good barley, good water source, a lot of money to build your distillery, kit it out, somebody competent to do the distilling, and you know, some good wood. You know, there you go. You don't really need an awful lot. Well, yeah, okay, it's a little bit more complex than that, obviously, but essentially what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter where your distillery is located. It could be Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, doesn't really matter. It's, you know, the fundamental principles are exactly the same, and you know, I think we're well beyond that sort of narrow mindset of whiskey can only be made in Scotland. I mean, I think we've blown that one voluntarily out of the water. Anyway, so yes, today's episode of the show is all about Bristol and a distillery called the Circumstantial Distillery. And I must admit, until I got sent the samples by James at Nottingham Whisky Association, so a big thank you to James, and a big thank you to Sarah at the distillery for sending the original bottles to James and all this kind of stuff. I'd heard of them, didn't really know anything about them, never tasted any of their spirits, so got a selection in front of me to share with you guys, which I think is going to be really interesting. And there's a bit of history about the distillery. I mean, you can find the information out on their website, but basically it all stems from a couple of guys called Liam Hurt and Danny Walker, who met during the sort of the 2000s while they were working in various bars and pubs. Both obviously had an interest in spirits, and when they kind of parted ways, sort of 2007, Liam decided he was going to start distilling gin in his basement. Got himself a sort of a small 30-litre still, and tinkered away in his basement, as they say. And it kind of, I guess, coincided with the sort of like the gin boom, shall we say, and things expanded. He was obviously producing gin that people wanted to buy and drink, and ended up moving to a larger premises in 2013, founding a distillery called the Psychopomp Distillery. Great name, it has to be said. I think it's still in production. And it was apparently based in an old grocery store. You know, nothing like being sort of recycling, as they say. So, as I get this impression that a lot of gin distillers, or rectifiers to give them their more sort of accurate description of what they're doing, probably have this desire to do something other than gin. Most probably really want to make whiskey at the end of the day, but whereas sort of creating a gin distillery is, well, still not exactly cheap, but compared to building a whiskey distillery is, you know, a fraction of the cost. And for most rectifiers, they're probably never going to do that. But anyway, sort of when the couple got back together, when Liam and Danny got back together, they decided that this was what they really wanted to do, and in 2018 opened the Circumstantial Distillery, which was considerably bigger, shall we say, although nowhere near the size of the original distillery that was in Bristol back in the 1800s. Now, one of the interesting things, I guess, about not being in Scotland is that you're not hamstrung by the Scotch Whisky Association. Now, and well, you know what I think about them. I mean, and we're not going to go into that. But so, being in England, they can play around with different grains, and that's exactly what they have done. And this is nothing new. You look at sort of some of the other English distilleries, Oxford for example, they're using sort of heritage grains, but at Circumstance they wanted to try things out. You know, yes, they wanted to do barley, they wanted to distill oats, they wanted to do corn, rye, molasses, I believe even triticale as well, although I'm guessing that's probably going to have to be imported from the States, I would have thought, and wheat. So yeah, they've got all this kit there, talking of which they I love the name they get. I mean, what is it with gin distillers? Gin distillers have this fetish for naming their stills. I mean, whiskey distillers don't seem to do it, but gin distillers have this kind of fetish for it, and they've kind of taken this naming fetish over to Circumstance, and they've called the still the Big Bastard. Cool. I mean, well, you look at it, if you might just be able to make it out on the title picture, but have a look at the online. You'll certainly find pictures of the still, and it's well, they describe it as an elegant and complicated saxophone. See, I told you these gin distillers seem to have fetishes for everything, and anyway, so but in technical terms, it is a 1,900 litre stainless steel pot still, quite unusual, which can be connected to two column stills. So there's a 4-plate still and a 12-plate still. So basically, again, like another English distillery, Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery, again, they have this flexibility with being able to produce different styles of spirits, which is really, really cool. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, you can pretty much do whatever you want with this kind of setup. You can sort of you can double distill in the pot still if you want. You could obviously then use one of the column stills. You could probably, I don't know, I don't think you can bypass the two column stills. It looks like they're kind of effectively rectifying columns rather than having their own heat source. But so you've got the 4-plate, you've got the 12-plate, you know, you can play around to your heart's content, you know, triple distillation, all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure that's what the guys there are doing. And yeah, it's on the surface it looks really, really interesting. I wouldn't say the distillery looks particularly pretty. I think it's on an industrial estate in Bristol. Certainly from looking at the interior pictures, it's a breeze block building, shall we say, but you know, do distilleries have to look nice and pretty? I guess not. And while we're talking about distilling in Bristol, there are some interesting parallels between the old what was it called? I have it noted here. Lee Valley Distillery in Bristol. I mean, apparently that was quite a large distillery, and covered somewhere in the region of 73,000, almost 74,000 square feet, whereas Circumstance is less than 10% of that, 5% I think probably, and although there are, like I said, there's some parallels. It certainly seems that the Bristol distillery was a grain distillery. They used malted and unmalted barley, rye and wheat, as well as maize. So I think, I mean, if you go back to the 1800s, it was more a case of producing alcohol, really, you know, whiskey in inverted commas, and essentially using what was available. So if it was rye, if it was wheat, if it was barley, you know, they pretty much used it. Again, so the original Lee Valley Distillery was set up with column stills to produce, you know, essentially grain spirit. But so it's kind of, I suppose, coming full circle, although Circumstance is sort of obviously taking a more technical view of it rather than just basically scavenging, for want of a better word. And you know, the whisky industry as a whole back in the 1800s scavenged, you know, casks, stuff, you know, you name it. And so what they're looking at doing is basically sort of saying, right, let's chuck the rule book out. Let's do all these interesting things. The website is absolutely full of information. It's a really good website in actual fact, and transparency seems to be again at the forefront of what they're doing, and obviously I'll explain when I look at the samples. But from what I can see, the distillery is really intriguing, really interesting, and certainly one to keep an eye on. And I'm kind of really looking forward to sharing what I've got here in front of me with you. So I think I've waffled enough. Getting a bit dry, so I think it's time to just introduce what the lineup. Although that's probably going to take a while because I have to explain things. But anyway, we'll get to the tasting bit shortly. Okay, so we're going to kick off first with the Circumstantial Organic Vodka, distilled from British wheat and bottled at 40%. So fairly straightforward, fairly simple. Obviously, get the. I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised they didn't do gin. Obviously, they've still got the Psychopomp Gin Distillery. No point in sort of replicating really. So yeah, vodka, get something out on the market. Second sample. What's that? Right, okay, so I'm going to start off with the Circumstantial Organic Vodka. It's bottled at 40% and it is made from a mash of, I believe, wholly British wheat. Don't know how many times it's been distilled. Possibly sort of they've used all three stills. Don't know about that one. I know more about the other ones, but obviously the vodka is kind of like I wouldn't quite go as far as saying a means to an end, but it's obviously what they decided to do as a starter while the whiskey was maturing. Second sample we're looking at is a sample of new make. Always like to look at new make. It's been cut to 50%, but I think their filling strength is something like 62.8. Now, I'd love to have seen that at its proper strength, but obviously, you know, beggars can't be choosers, as they say. So we will see what that is like. And although when I actually tasted it originally, I didn't know whether it was oats, wheat or barley. I figured it was barley, and it is indeed a barley mash, which I thought was thankful, because I thought, God, if I'd have sort of said, oh, is that one of your wheat mashes? And they go, no, it's barley, don't you know anything? That would have been, shall we say, slightly, yeah, anyway. But no, I got it right, thankfully, not to just blow my own horn. Then we're going to move on to looking at some whiskey. This is the Circumstantial Oat. Now, after the name, you get 1, 2, 3, 4. You get 5 numbers. So it's 121, 150, bottled at 46.8%. And this is where the whole clarity issue comes in, and that if you can go on the website, you can look up what all of these codes stand for, and they do stand for something. So the first letter is the batch number, so obviously batch number 1. Second number is the fermentation, so this being 21 is a blend of fermentation number 7 and fermentation number 1. Right, so now you need to go and have a look at what 7 and 1 is. So 7 is a mash of 70% malted oats and 30% malted barley, fermented using mead yeast and distiller's yeast. Didn't actually touch on this while I was talking about the distillery, but not only are they looking at different types of grains, they're also using unusual yeast types. So again, you know, really pushing the boundaries here, I think. Using mead and distiller's yeast for a minimum of 11 days, and fermentation number 1 is 100% malted barley, fermented using French saison and distiller's yeast with a 13-day fermentation. So fermentation number 21 is 5 parts number 7 to 1 part number 1. Told you this was going to take quite a while. Third number is the distillation. So it's distillation number 1, which is first in the stainless steel pot still, which, as you see from the picture, has a copper head, and then passing through the 4-plate copper column still. The next number is the maturation, so it's number 1, which is basically charred British oak spindle. I think, well, obviously British oak is British oak, that's the obvious. I think a spindle is smaller cask, don't know the exact size. So maturation number 1 is charred British oak spindles and ex-bourbon, and the final number is the length of its aging. So in this instance 50 stands for 50 months, so just over 3 years. So or 4 years, sorry. So yeah, so like I said, they all have this interesting code. So the next one, we'll be a bit quicker on this one. So the next is called the Circumstantial Single Grain Whisky 110-1237. So batch 1, fermentation number 10, which is 85% malted barley, 15% unmalted barley, fermented using French saison yeast for 10 to 14 days. Distillation number 1, the pot still and the 4-plate copper column. Maturation number 2 is first fill ex-bourbon and aged for 37 months. Next sample, I'm losing track of where we are, is another circumstantial grain whisky. This time it is number 114-1236. So again, batch number 1, fermentation number 14, which is 70% organic malted wheat, 30% organic malted barley, fermented with Bavarian and French Bavarian wheat yeast and French saison yeast for 14 days. Distillation number 1, maturation number 2, aged for 36 months. So really quite looking forward to that. I mean, I know that Bill Lumsden is very much into his yeast and played around with, certainly with roasted barley and different types of yeast at Glenmorangie. So yeah, nice to see, sort of, because this is it. The yeast does seem to be a little bit overlooked in all of this going on about sort of like different wood types, different barley types, fermentation length, you know, time of distillation, and a lot of the time it's just, well, we just use distiller's yeast, you know. So, but again, there's a huge broad range of yeasts. I mean, some, I'm guessing, are probably not necessarily suitable for distillation, and I guess that, you know, you try them out, you know. Anyway, so the final sample today is a cask sample. This is the Circumstantial Rye. Don't know what the ABV is, possibly cut to 50%. Excuse me, 50%. Now, when this is eventually released, it will be a, well, 1, 2, don't know what the distillation is, so it will be batch number 1, it will be fermentation number 2, which is 51% malted rye, 49% malted barley, fermented using mead and distiller's yeast for 11 days. It will be maturation number 18, aged in 220 litre ex-Tawny port. Obviously don't know how long they intend to age this for, but currently it is, I believe, 15 months old, so really looking forward to the rye. Right, okay, so now I am really dry and I need some liquid, so I think it's just time to kick off with the bottle. Right, okay, so this is the Circumstantial Organic Wheat Vodka. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? It's clean, it's got a slight oiliness and a definite wheatiness. This is the thing that people seem to forget about vodkas. So many vodkas are distilled just within a fraction of their lives, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, you know. By the time you've done that, I mean, you're not going to have any character. It's just going to be basically neutral grain spirit. There isn't going to be any inkling of what the original spirit was. And to me, what's the point? I mean, well, the point of it is you basically chuck it in Coke to make an alcoholic Coke. But obviously, as we know, real vodka or proper vodka should at least give you an indication of what the raw materials are. And this does it. You know, it's really quite pleasant. It's not particularly complex, but you can smell the wheat. You can smell the slight oiliness. It's got a nice cleanliness to it. So yeah, let's see what it piles on. Soft, wheaty, slight creaminess, slight sweetness, good length. Again, tells me that it's been distilled from wheat. It's got a lovely natural character, a little bit of an earthiness on the finish. Good length. Quite happy to drink that. I think that's absolutely lovely. Great spirit. So this is kind of setting out the fact that obviously the guys at Circumstantial or the distiller, who I did have a note of the distiller's name, Mark Scott, who apparently has been working in Paris, who was brought on board. I'm assuming Mark is still the distiller at the distillery, so it's obvious that he knows what he's doing, because the spirit that, well, certainly the vodka that they produce is very, very good. Okay, so let's move on to the new make. As you well know, I always love to taste Distillery's new make. It is the DNA of a distillery. You know, there's nothing else cluttering it up. You get the whole character of the spirit. Now, obviously, as they make sort of a lot of different mashes, but anyway, this will give us a kind of a clue to sort of how things are going with them. Okay, so it's quite cereally, quite wheaty. I mean, I should have looked up the fermentation of the barley, but I didn't, unfortunately. But it's, although it's a 14-day fermentation, it's not, well, I'm guessing a 14-day fermentation. That does seem to be the length of time they go for. It's not in the big estery fruit camp, which I would have expected. Now, I'm going to sort of guess that that's possibly something to do with the yeast. Maybe the French Saison yeast doesn't kind of produce quite such a fruitiness as, say, the distiller's yeast. I mean, there is a fruitiness there, don't get me wrong, but it's more of a cereal character, and it's the sort of character that I get on new make that has had a relatively short, you know, 70, 90 hour fermentation, because the emphasis is on the grain, shall we say. It's got a nice fragrance to it. It's a little bit of an off the still kind of note, but it is very, very clean, and there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of fusel oils. So it's obvious that the use of the column is basically giving a slightly higher rectified final spirit than it would have done if you just distilled it in the pot stills on its own. So so yeah, interesting, and like I said, it's kind of giving you a kind of an inkling, a clue to what the style of the distillery's spirit is going to be. And I would have thought on this nosing, I would have thought 36 months aging is possibly going to be a bit on the short, although not necessarily for removing fusel oils, because there isn't a great deal there to start off with, but for adding vanillins and maybe fleshing it out. But interesting. Let's see what passes on. Soft, sweet barley. There's an underneath of slightly tropical fruit, so maybe I was a bit wrong with the sort of my observations on the fermentation. There is a slight tropical fruit note there, but it's certainly nowhere near as tropical as some other distilleries that I have, like McMyra, for example, and they have quite a long fermentation time. A little bit, again, not very fusel. There's a little bit of that sort of off the still kind of note, but overall that's a really clean spirit. Nice grip, okay length. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it, which will probably bring it down to sort of somewhere around about 46. Although, like I said, this has already been cut to 50, so A little bit more maltiness, a little bit more of that kind of barley husks, and almost straw. Still quite fragrant. Again, a lovely sweetness to the nose. And again, there is, it's still held on to that slight tropical note as well. So it'll pass like that. A lot more oily, a lot more fusel, a lot more impurities. But again, it's got a juiciness. It's got a lovely, clean, fresh, no, more oily, fresh, not quite fresh, more oily sort of intensity. A little bit longer as well, getting that cereal husk kind of aftertaste. I mean, that is quality spirit, it has to be said. And it's just a case of leaving it in the oak for long enough and not bottling it too soon, which is, I guess, when you're a distiller and you've got this, it's your baby and you want to get it out there to the world, you know, there's always this danger that you just bottle it because you want to bottle it rather than it's actually ready. Not that I'm making an observation about what's coming, because obviously I've not tasted them yet, but that's always a sort of an observation that you have with, certainly with newer distilleries, or a thought, should we say. But I like that. I think that's very, very pretty. Right, okay, so on to the real McCoy, as they say. So this is the oat. So I'm not going to go back through all the permutations, but yeah, predominantly oak, and you know, 70-30 at the end of the day. That's a nice nose. Barley is actually quite noticeable, considering it's only 30% of the actual, roughly about 30%. It's got a fullness to it. It's got, I get the oat. It's not sort of as in your face oat. It's kind of, it just sits in the background, if you see what I mean. The barley is kind of quite forward. The oat is sitting back. It's got a lovely herbal note, touch of orange. A little bit of marzipan. The oak is starting to come through that sort of marzipan, vanilla kind of character. Little tropical note as well, some black pepper. That's a nice nose. That is lovely. I really like this. It is quite complex for such a young spirit. I mean, 50 months does seem to be about right for this. And it's got a warmth to it as well. The oats kind of give it a warmth. And there's no I don't get minerality per se. I don't get sort of austerity. I just get this lovely warmth and roundness. And the oats do, I wouldn't say become more noticeable. That they're there, if you see what I mean. What I'm trying to say is this is a lovely nose. It has complexity that, as you would expect from the use of the different raw materials, and then it's got sort of a balanced oak character, which doesn't basically sort of just, you know, wipe the floor with everything else. Yeah, sort of pass right. A lot more oat on the palate. Really taste those lovely rounded soft oats, a little bit of barley, so it's kind of flipped the nose. Apricot, orange, white pepper, a little bit of black pepper as well, some spices, cinnamon possibly, delicate. It's got a lovely delicacy to it. The oak does come through on the mid palate. Again, it's not overwhelming. Sort of. Again, it has that sort of oily, marzipan-y kind of character. It's obviously it is first fill, isn't it? It's got quite a sort of a grip to it, which I'm guessing is possibly the English oak, because it's not all about soft vanillins. Certainly on the palate, I'm getting a lot more grippiness, and it's not a French oak grippy tannin. It's a different grippy tannin, and it can only be the influence of the English oak or the British oak. I like that. That's quite impressive again, and it's bottled, it seems to me, at the right time. Yes, all right, you could leave it a little bit longer, but it's certainly being bottled at 50 months does seem to be the right amount of time for this, because it's just a lovely whiskey at the end of the day, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. Will the oat character stay sort of like, you know, fairly dominant? Will the oat come forward a little bit more? I guess this is probably only something that time will tell. But what I guess the interesting thing is, because the distillery is doing essentially batch bottling, and you're always going to know if there's going to be little tweaks to it, and I'm guessing that the basic sort of structure of this particular whiskey is going to stay the same. The only thing that's going to change is the length of time it's been matured for. So I think that's going to be really intriguing to keep an eye on. So yeah, love that. That's impressive. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the two single grain whiskies. This is the 85% malted barley and 15% unmalted barley. So essentially an Irish pot still whiskey, obviously, but not distilled in Ireland. Let's see what the nose gives us. Now, completely different, as you would expect. I mean, it has that Irish pot still character. That unmalted barley is just so noticeable. It has that grainy dried fruit. Quite youthful, charred oak, a little bit of wood spice, vanilla, quite a lot of oak coming through. I'm getting that sweet, corny kind of bourbon-y character. Obviously, this because they're first fill casks. Not as fruity as I was expecting, it has to be said. It's a bit raw, it's a bit spirity. It's got an edge to it. Now, I guess this is sort of like this. I don't mind it. The edge is not too edgy. You know, it's not industrial. There is a sweetness there, and so in essence, there is. It's sort of appealing. Like I said earlier, from the nose, I question whether this should have possibly been left for 50 months, like the oak, or maybe a little longer. I mean, but it has its plus points. I mean, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't have bottled it now, but I think it'll be interesting to see how a little bit more time is going to sort of just take that little bit of rawness away from the nose. Maybe that would ruin it for you. You know, this is it. We're all different at the end of the day. Anyway, let's see what pass on. There's a lot of oak on the palate, and it kicks off with the oak, the vanilla, the spice, the toast. The grain is only really starting to come through on the end, to be honest with you. Again, it's got that grainy kind of pot still character, oily barley, little herbal spice, a little bit of fruit. I think it's kind of, it's not ungainly, it's just basically we're at the point where I think this needed a little bit more time. I think the oak is a little bit too dominant to start off with. Given a bit more time in the cask, I think that the oak may well have sort of, I wouldn't say integrated better, but it would have possibly sort of just softened itself out a little bit. I mean, this is the thing, as we know, sort of maturation is not linear. Subtraction and addition happens at the same time, but at different rates, and sometimes in different casks, you know, completely differently. So what I'm saying is, I just, a little bit more time, I think this would have sort of like evened itself out a little more. But as it stands at the moment, I think it's a really good whiskey, really intriguing, and like I said, it has that distinct, you know, pot still kind of character, which I think is just, well, really intriguing. Right, okay, so let's move on to the second of the single grain whiskey. So this is the wheat whiskey, if you like. So 70% organic malted wheat and 30% organic malted barley. This is something I'd often wondered about with the use of other types of grain other than barley, whether you never find out half the time whether those different grains like the wheat or the oats or what have you have been malted or whether they're unmalted. But obviously in this instance we know they're both malted. So and obviously looking forward to this because of the the use of the Bavarian wheat yeast. So oh, that's nice. That's interesting. It's kind of dark and malty and slightly Bavarian in character, but it's got this zippy citric kind of note. More fruit, apricot, melon, quite tropical. Definite wheat flake note. That's coming through quite strongly. Oh, I like this nose. This is really, really interesting. And even though it's only 36 months in the oak isn't too much. Now, of course, on the nose, the previous sample displayed a similar kind of good balance of oak and spirit. So it was when it came to the palate that the oak was a little bit overly dominant. But that's really nice. That's a really intriguing nose. And I'll almost go and say that I've probably not come across anything quite like it. I mean, yes, all right, you get wheated bourbons for argument's sake, but this has a completely different kind of profile. Like I said, it's dark, it's malty, it's got this kind of Bavarian kind of character, but it's got a zippiness to it, a sort of a lovely kind of citric note. Let's see what that's like. Now that is much better balanced, more spirit forward. Oak is nowhere near as dominant. It's just sitting in the background. It's giving structure. Quite fruity again, sort of apricot, apple, straw, wheat flakes, a little bit of spice, a little bit of vanilla. It's got a almost kind of unsweetened marshmallowy kind of note to it, if you can imagine a sort of an unsugary marshmallow, if that makes any sense to you. It's got a lovely length, it's juicy, it's got some fruit. Again, the wheat flakes are kind of noticeable throughout. It has this darker, malty, almost Bavarian sort of kind of character, sort of just underpinning it all. That is impressive. That is really, really good. I really like that. And like I said, even though it's only been aged for 36 months, that has worked so much better than the previous one. The balance is just absolutely spot on. I really, really like that. Okay, so let's move on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. So this is the rye cask sample. So 51% malted rye, 49% malted barley, aged in tawny port. Let's see what the nose is. Raw and pungent. Pretty much what you would expect. It's only 15 months. I mean, toasted dark rye bread, earthy tawny fruit, a little bit of manure, a little bit of yeast, almost raw cocoa bean, some grippy tannins, more manure, stinky, straw, decaying straw. Oh, I like this. It's a bit off the wall, it has to be said. I mean, there's nowhere near ready yet. I mean, another 15 months or 16 months, and that rawness will kind of like drop off a little bit. And I mean, yes, it's interesting from a technical point of view at this moment in time, but you wouldn't really want to drink this too much, not unless you've got a bit of a but anyway, it's really intriguing. I mean, I love the combination of the sort of the dark rye bread and the tawny fruit. And that sort of almost kind of cocoa, sort of chocolatey kind of note sitting in the background. I mean, that's a lovely mash. That's a lovely nose, it has to be said. Let's see what the pass on. Dark, raw, pungent, intense, earthy rye, grippy rye, sort of drying, quite tannic, quite intense. Obviously, like I said, this is nowhere near ready for bottling yet. But it's an interesting insight into sort of spirit's evolution at this kind of point in its time in the cask. Like I said, I think it's probably been cut to about 50%. I will put a little drop of water in to see what that does to it. Oh, that really emphasises the rawness. The kind of tawny port notes have kind of pretty much dissipated completely, and that's just kind of raw rye spirit now. Let's see what the pass like. I'll tell you what, the Germans would love that at that point. I mean, they seem to have a fetish for bloody, rye spirit that's been aged for about 5 minutes in cask. Yeah, that's kind of shown up the fact that that's nowhere near ready. But it's really intriguing, and when that comes out, I'll be looking forward to tasting it. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Firstly, a big thank you to Sarah at the Distillery and to James at Nottingham Whisky Association for the samples for today's episode of the show. As per usual, your support is very, very much appreciated, and obviously without that there wouldn't be a good Dram show, which would be rather sad, I suppose, but anyway, yeah, big thank you. So Circumstantial Oat, overall very, very impressed, worth looking into, certainly if they're available in your market. Don't know how far afield from the UK that they are exporting, but certainly if they are available, worth looking into. Vodka, yeah, good quality vodka at the end of the day. It told me what it was made from. It wasn't overly distilled, so yeah, no problems with that whatsoever. The new make, interesting. Obviously, it was with them making sort of so many different mash bills and stuff like that. It was just a sort of like just viewing their 100% barley mash, and it's obviously setting out what their sort of spirit is going to be like. Not too fruity, and surprisingly not for the length of fermentation, but like I said, I think it's more to do with the interaction of the yeast. Certainly the French Saison yeast that they're using is probably not giving quite such an estery kind of character, but still had some nice fruitiness, and it's an interesting spirit nevertheless. The oat, loved it. Thought that was a great whiskey. Really got the oaty character, certainly on the palate. It definitely sort of like, said oats to me. And loved the transparency, loved the fact you know exactly what they've done to this, and yeah, 50 months, yeah, that worked as far as I could see. The first single grain whiskey, the sort of malted, unmalted barley, the sort of pot still mash, I liked it. It was interesting. I think it needed a little bit more time in the oak. I think 37 months was a little bit short for it. I think the oak was a little bit aggressive. Probably could have done with, like I said, more time just to harmonise. But that's a personal opinion. Obviously, I always suggest you try it and you make up your own mind. The second of the two grain whiskies, the sort of like the wheated whiskey, if you like, absolutely stunning. À point, as they say. I think sort of, even though it was only 36 months aged, it really was, it worked. And I think that was the whole point of the thing. I think that the wheat is a little bit softer. It's maybe not quite so sort of raw in character. Maybe it just lends itself to earlier maturation, whereas the sort of like the pot still mash needs a bit more time. But I thought that worked really, really well. And the tawny port matured rye sample, yeah, really intriguing, really intense, really stinky at this stage, and it's really interesting, and it's unusual for distilleries to allow you to sort of see a kind of a work in progress at the end of the day. It's lovely because when you buy the final product, you've got a benchmark, and you can say, well, this is what it was like at 15, this is what it's like now at 36, 40, 50 months or whatever, and it's a nice sort of way of comparing, and I think that's going to be sort of, again, really interesting. So look forward to seeing that when it's actually released. So yeah, I think it's been a really interesting episode of the show. Like I said, if the distillery is available in your locale, or you can go online and you can purchase directly from the distillery, I would certainly suggest you at least give them a try, because they're not badly priced. So yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been really intriguing and interesting. And like I said, give these guys a chance. Put your hand in your pocket and support them, and they'll carry on doing this kind of work. And we're all the better for it, in my personal opinion. So until next week, good afternoon, and yes, it is just about afternoon. Good dramming.